All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into some really interesting relationship stuff, like those tiny little things that can actually tell you a lot about how things are going.
Yeah, those small gestures, those almost invisible moments.
Exactly. We're calling it the bird test, the door test, and duck moments. And we're going to be using this great source, small acts of connection, bird and door tests, to kind of guide our deep dive. It's all about how those tiny hints can reveal some pretty big things about your relationships.
Exactly. It's like those small, everyday interactions can actually tell you a lot about the health of your connection with someone.
Okay, so let's start with the bird test. I feel like a lot of people have probably heard about this one, right? It's been making the rounds on TikTok and all that.
Yeah, it's definitely gone viral. But beyond the trend, there's some really solid research behind it.
Right. So for anyone who hasn't heard of it, the basic idea is this. You casually mention seeing a bird, like just in passing conversation with your partner,
Yeah.
and then you watch their reaction.
Exactly. It's not about the bird itself, it's about how your partner responds to your bid for connection.
A bid for connection. That sounds pretty fancy. What does that even mean?
Well, it comes from the work of Dr. John Gottman, a renowned relationship researcher. He found that these little attempts to connect with our partners, like pointing out a bird or sharing a funny thought, those are bids for connection.
So it's like saying, hey, want to share this little thing with me? Want to connect for a sec?
Exactly. And the way your partner responds, it can actually tell you a lot about the strength of your bond. Gottman talks about turning towards and turning away.
Okay, so turning towards versus turning away. Give us some examples. What does that look like in real life?
So imagine you point out a bird and your partner says, "Oh, wow, where did you see it?" That's turning towards your bid. They're engaging, showing interest.
But even a simple, that's cool, would count as turning toward.
Right. Even if it's not super enthusiastic, it's still acknowledging your attempt to connect.
But if they completely ignore you or like abruptly change the subject, that's turning away.
Exactly. And while one instance might not be a big deal, imagine that pattern repeating over and over. It can really start to create distance in a relationship.
Yeah, I can see how that would erode the connection over time. It's like they're
Yeah.
saying, I'm not interested in sharing this with you.
Right. And that can be really hurtful, even if it's unintentional.
So this Small Acts of Connection book, it gives some really concrete examples of what these bids for connection might look like, right? Like beyond just the bird thing.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about what you say, it's about how you respond, too.
So what are some ways we can all get better at turning towards our partner's bids for connection?
Active listening is key, for sure. Put your phone down, make eye contact, really engage with what they're saying, even if it seems small or insignificant.
Yeah, even if it's about like a weird-looking squirrel or something.
Exactly. And ask questions. Show that you're curious and want to learn more. And don't underestimate the power of nonverbal cues, a smile, a touch.
Those little things can really make someone feel seen and heard. And I guess it's not just about responding, but also initiating those bids for connection ourselves,
Mm.
right? Like being the one to reach out and try to connect with our partner.
Absolutely. Healthy relationships are a two-way street. It's not just about one person always being the initiator. So encourage your partner to reach out too. Notice when they seem like they're trying to connect and respond positively.
So it's like creating this dynamic where both people feel comfortable expressing those needs for connection. And that leads us to the next concept, the door test. This one seems pretty straightforward, right? It's all about those acts of courtesy and respect.
Right, like holding the door open for someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or offer them your seat on a crowded bus, things like that. But it goes beyond just those physical gestures, right?
Exactly. Think of it more broadly. How does this person treat you in everyday situations? Do they listen to you without interrupting? Do they consider your feelings when making decisions?
It's like, do they treat you with respect and consideration, even in those little moments?
Precisely. The Small Acts of Connection book really emphasizes this idea of looking beyond the grand gestures to those everyday interactions. It's about those small acts of kindness and consideration that can really make a difference. Like, do they offer to help you carry groceries? Do they remember your favorite coffee order?
It's like, do they see you? Do they think about you, even in those small ways? And speaking of small acts of connection, it also talks about the importance of reciprocity here, right? It shouldn't just be one person always doing those courteous things.
Exactly. We want to cultivate a culture of mutual care and respect. So if your partner holds the door for you, thank them. If they offer you their seat, acknowledge that gesture.
It's like those little acknowledgments can go a long way in reinforcing those positive behaviors.
Absolutely. It's a feedback loop. The more we acknowledge and appreciate those acts of kindness, the more likely they are to continue.
So I got to ask, have you ever, like, actually used the door test on a date or something?
Yeah.
Be honest.
Maybe. But more importantly, I try to be mindful of my own behavior too. Am I holding doors for others? Am I being considerate in my interactions?
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in observing other people's behavior, but it's equally important to look at our own actions. Are we being the kind of partner we want to have?
Exactly. We can't expect those acts of courtesy and respect if we're not willing to offer them ourselves. Now, before we move on to duck moments, which I am super curious about, any thoughts from you about how we can all get better at both noticing and reciprocating those small acts of connection, whether it's holding a door or just listening attentively to someone's story? So, duck moments. I love this idea. And like we said, it's not always about literal ducks.
Right. It's about those times when something unexpected happens and you and your partner need to react quickly, work together as a team.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how those moments can really reveal the strength of a relationship.
But can you rely on each other when it really counts?
Exactly. Can you overcome any resistance or hesitation and just like act as a united front?
You know, it's funny. It makes me think of those scenes in action movies where, like, the hero and their sidekick have to dodge a trap or something. Perfect timing, total trust.
Yeah. It
That-
takes trust, communication, a shared sense of purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But obviously, most of us aren't dodging explosions in real life.
Yeah.
So what do duck moments look like for, regular people?
Well, think about it this way. Sometimes those projectiles are emotional, not physical. Like maybe your partner's dealing with a work deadline that's stressing them out. Or they just got some bad news.
So those are emotional duck moments.
Right.
Got it. But how do we handle those? It seems like a different kind of teamwork than, like, dodging a literal object.
It is. And this is where all that groundwork we were talking about earlier, this bird test, those door tests, it really comes into play. Like, remember Gottman's research on turning towards?
Yeah, turning towards those bids for connection.
Right. Well, all those small moments, they build up this reservoir of goodwill,
Mhm.
and that becomes super valuable during times of stress.
I love that. It's like making deposits into a relationship bank account. All
Yeah.
those little acts of kindness, they add up. So
Yeah.
when you need to make a withdrawal during a tough time, there's something there.
Exactly. And one key to navigating those emotional duck moments is, first of all, recognizing them. Pay attention to your partner's cues. Are they withdrawn, irritable, overwhelmed?
So it's about tuning in, being sensitive. Okay, but what do we do after we recognize the duck moment? How do we actually offer support in a way that feels helpful?
That's where empathy and validation come in.
Mhm.
Let your partner know you see their struggle, you're there for them, and try to resist the urge to jump right into problem-solving mode.
Yeah, sometimes people just need to vent, right? They don't
Right.
necessarily want advice.
Exactly. Sometimes just listening, acknowledging their feelings, that's the most supportive thing you can do. It's like saying, I'm here with you in this.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But what if they do want help solving the problem? How do we offer support without taking over?
Good question. That's when collaboration becomes crucial. Ask them, how can I best support you right now? Maybe they need help brainstorming, or maybe they just need someone to listen while they process things.
So it's about working together as a team.
Exactly, but respecting their autonomy, not making them feel like they can't handle it themselves.
Right. It's about ducking with them, not for them.
Yeah.
And that takes trust. They need to trust that you're not judging them, not trying to control things.
You got it. And that trust, like we've been saying, it's built through those everyday interactions, those bird tests and door tests, those little moments, they add up to create this foundation that allows you to handle the bigger stuff together.
It's almost like weaving a tapestry,
Yeah.
Each little thread of connection, of courtesy, of trust, it all contributes to the overall strength of the fabric. And then when those duck moments come along, that tapestry can withstand the impact. Makes sense, right?
Beautifully put. But of course, things don't always go perfectly right. What about those times when the ducking doesn't go so smoothly? When there's resistance or conflict instead of cooperation?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. What does that mean for the relationship? Is it like a bad sign?
It can be a sign that something deeper is going on, for sure. Maybe there's some underlying resentment or lack of trust that needs to be addressed.
So it's like a wake-up call, a sign that something needs to change.
Exactly. And the best way to deal with that, open and honest communication. Sit down with your partner, talk about what happened during that duck moment, try to understand each other's perspective.
So it's like hitting the pause button and taking a moment to reflect.
Right. But of course, those conversations can be tough, especially if emotions are running high.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where a therapist can be incredibly helpful. They provide a safe space to work through those challenges, to learn how to communicate more effectively.
Like having a relationship coach in your corner.
Exactly. And remember, it's never too late to start improving your ducking skills, so to speak. It's an ongoing journey. And every step you take together, it strengthens that bond.
That's really encouraging. But before we move on, I'm curious about something. We've been talking about responding to our partner's needs during those duck moments, but what about encouraging reciprocity? How do we make sure both partners are actively contributing to that sense of teamwork and support?
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The bird test, the door test, and those duck moments. And I think what's really striking me is how interconnected all of these concepts are.
Yeah, for sure. Trust, respect, connection. It's not about just one test or moment. It's about like the whole picture they create
Right.
together.
It's like they're all pieces of a puzzle, and when you put them together, you get a much clearer picture of the relationship's overall health.
Exactly. And what's cool is that these ideas, they're not limited to romantic relationships either. Think about your friendships, your family dynamics,
Hmm.
even work relationships. Oh yeah, that's true. Noticing those bids for connection, being courteous, being able to duck together, it applies everywhere.
Absolutely. It's like having this toolkit of relationship skills that you can use in all areas of your life.
I love that analogy. So, okay, let's talk more about reciprocity. We've touched on it, but it's so essential for a healthy balance in any relationship. We don't want to fall into those patterns where one person is always the one initiating, always extending, always ducking more than the other.
Right. It's about finding that equilibrium. And how do we actually encourage that reciprocity? It's easy to focus on what our partners should be doing, but how do we invite them to meet us halfway?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I think sometimes I struggle with this. Like, how do you bring it up without sounding, accusatory or demanding?
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balance, but it starts with communication. Clear, compassionate communication. If you're feeling like you're always the one reaching out, the one expressing those needs for connection, let your partner know.
I think that's where I get stuck sometimes.
Mm.
Like I'm worried about sounding critical or, I don't know, nagging.
I get it. It's about finding that sweet spot between being assertive and being empathetic. Instead of blaming or accusing, focus on your own experience. Like, hey, when I don't feel like my bids for connection are being reciprocated, I start to feel a little disconnected.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about owning our feelings and expressing them in a way that invites our partner to understand and participate.
Exactly. And it's not just about initiating those bids for connection, it's also about reciprocating those acts of courtesy and support. Like, if your partner holds the door for you, a simple thank you goes a long way. If they go out of their way to support you during a tough time, acknowledge that and express your appreciation.
It's like those small acts of gratitude create this positive feedback loop.
Right. They reinforce those behaviors that ultimately make the relationship stronger. But I know what you're thinking. What happens when those conversations don't seem to be working? What if there's still that imbalance, even after you've tried to communicate your needs?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like, what if your partner just doesn't seem to get it or they're resistant to change?
That can be really tough. And in those situations, it might be helpful to consider couples therapy. A therapist can provide that neutral space to explore those dynamics, to help you develop healthier patterns of communication and interaction. Sometimes it's really valuable to have that outside perspective.
It's like having a relationship coach in your corner, helping you both see those blind spots and work together to create a more balanced dynamic.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to emphasize that these tests, they're not about passing or failing. They're really invitations. Invitations to be more mindful, more intentional in our relationships.
Yeah, I love that. It's about creating that awareness of those small moments that over time can have a huge impact.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, pay attention. Notice those bird tests, those door tests, those subtle bids for connection. And see those duck moments, whether they're big or small, see them as opportunities to strengthen your bonds.
It's not just about observing. It's about actively participating. It's about reciprocating and creating that dynamic where both people feel seen, heard, valued.
Beautifully said. And remember, building healthy relationships takes time and effort, but it's so worth it. Those connections, they enrich our lives in ways we can't even imagine.
Couldn't agree more. That's all for this deep dive, everyone.